Hi, and welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms. I'm Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Vivian Carlin. Welcome back. This is part two of our infants and sleeping through the night. So let's imagine you have a 9, 12, 15, 18-month old, you name it, whatever age, who is still waking up at night and you are ready to get them to sleep through the night. Well, we are ready to give you advice on that. So let's jump in.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
So, Vivian, I can't wait to hear the advice that you have for this topic, the older infant sleeping through the night.
I would encourage our listeners, if you haven't listened to our first Infants and Sleeping Through the Night episode, to go back and do that. Because I think what you're going to find is that I sleep trained very early on. Sylvia didn't sleep train at all. And now what we need to talk about is the people that are somewhere in between us. When I see a 9-month-old or a 12-month-old, one of the things we ask about in the well child check is sleep. We want to know how the infant is sleeping. And oftentimes I'll hear that the infant is sleeping fine, but they're still waking up once or twice at night to eat. And this is what I say to parents in that position. I
Mm-hmm.
say, your baby, assuming these things are true, has now gained enough weight and is old enough that they do not need to be eating at night. So, do you want to encourage them to sleep through the night? A certain percentage of babies will go on to just naturally drop the night feedings, but it might be 12 months, 15 months, 18 months. And then there are a certain percentage that get stuck and at some point have to be pushed to drop that feeding. So this
Mm-hmm.
is really parental preference.
Mm-hmm.
When I encounter a parent who's like, yes, I'm ready, I want to get them to sleep through the night, what I say is the way to do that is to let them cry it out. So basically, feed your baby as you normally do, put them down. When they wake up to cry, when you would normally get them up to feed them, let them cry. And a lot of babies will naturally settle down after 10 or 15 minutes. Some it's longer. Let them cry it out. And if you're willing to do that, most babies, after a very short number of days, will just stop waking up at night. It can be
Mm-hmm.
that simple. And I do encourage people that if you're going to do this, there really is an advantage to doing it in that 9 to 12-month age range before the infant is old enough to be calling out to you by name, because we're right on the verge where they're going to be crying and they're going to be going, Mama, Mama, and then it can be much harder to do it. So you have to kind of weigh when you want to do this. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when I say this is nuanced, there is something often referred to as the Ferber Method, which is considered a gradual extinction approach. And there's great resources on this, but basically, you are going to let them cry. You're going to set your timer for like 3 minutes, and then you're just going to go into the room and check on them. You're going to let your baby know that you're there. You're going to offer words of reassurance. You may go over and just pat them on the back and tell them that everything is okay, but they need to go back to sleep. And then you're going to leave without picking them up. And they're going to cry. You know that they're going to cry, but you're going to keep doing that at these periodic intervals to reassure your baby. And then as you lengthen the intervals, the majority of babies by far will end up giving up and sleeping. And then if you just hang on for a few nights doing that, the majority again will sleep through the night after that. So this is my how to sleep train at those older ages.
I have a story about this. As I outlined in the previous episode about sleep, I fed whenever they needed to be fed overnight. So I describe myself to my patients. I'm a real softie. I don't like to allow them to cry. I think and it's okay,
Not all.
Yes, and I confess to them that I am a huge softie, and the mental place that I describe for parents if they're not ready to let their baby cry just yet, like me. And I usually describe to them, the baby's like 6 months, 9 months. Your baby is crying. You're not sure if they're hungry or not. When you feed them, they actually drink. So it really tugs at the mom's heartstrings, like they're actually hungry. So I am going to get them. And I relate 100% to that, right? That's me as a parent. So with these types of parents, the next step that I tell them in anticipation of when you would be able to do the cry it out is when you are sure, and it's usually more along the over a year, 15 months, 18-month-old, when you're sure that your child is manipulating you, where
Ah,
they're crying,
yes.
you walk in the room and they're all smiles and they want to play with you. And then you put them back down, and then they start crying again as you walk out of the room, and then as you turn, then they suddenly stop crying. I tell parents, once you're sure that your child is quote unquote manipulating you, then it is much easier for softy parents like me to implement the cry it out. You absolutely don't need me anymore.
Yes.
Now I am going to implement the cry it out.
Okay, see, this is what I was saying about that phase where they're now old enough, they're standing up on the side of the crib, they're calling you by name. That for some people, that's actually harder. And I tell the softy parents, okay, put in your mind, you will be a better parent for your child if you're sleeping through the night, if that's what they
Yes.
choose. You have to use that as the story you're telling yourself. Okay,
Right.
Sylvia, I am
It
so not
is
a softy. I'm like, bring that baby to my house and I will have them sleeping through the night in 2 days and you never have to know how much they cried.
I am such a softie, and it's funny that you think that 15-month-old time is the time that it gets harder.
I do.
For softies, it gets easier because then you know they don't need you, right?
Okay, okay. I
Do you
can
see
see
that?
this, I can see this,
Yes.
yeah. But it is
Yeah.
funny how I mean, and this is why this kind of discussion is important because even as pediatricians,
Mhm.
we have our own experiences and viewpoints that affect how we counsel, but you can see how there's not a right or wrong answer to this. So
Right.
this is interesting seeing the different viewpoints.
I want to share with you a story of one of my children around that 15 to 18-month age, because that is the time where we implemented some sort of sleep training, which honestly, in the Vivian Carlin playbook is really, really late. But, you know, in the,
Few
in the
weeks.
bank in the bank playbook, it is like, pretty much when we start. So one of my children wasn't
Mhm.
such a great eater. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
yeah, he was just kind of a smaller kid, and growth was somewhat of an issue early on, and
Much
it
harder.
does make it harder where
Yeah.
you're feeling like, "Oh, I wanna get
Mhm.
as many calories into you as
Yes.
possible," and if you're waking up at night and I can feed you again, then that was going to happen. So, flash forward, where this child is now, 15, 18 months, showing those manipulative tendencies that I described earlier, and he would cry. And this is a challenge on two levels. So, first of all, we lived in a multi generational household where my mother also lived with us. This is her first grandchild,
Mm.
right? And her room is actually right next to his room. Yeah. It's set up for disaster. So, when we decided that we were going to let him cry, actually, my husband would have to stand outside his door to prevent my mother from going in,
Oh my
right?
gosh, that is such a great story.
So this is the scenario where all
Mm,
adults need to be on board because her grandson was crying and she was going to go in there.
super
So,
important.
yes. So
Love that.
that was kind of a phase in a transition where I needed to have a separate discussion with my mom to tell her this is what we want to do as parents. I definitely had the weight of being a pediatrician. My mom is
Mhm.
not a pediatrician or a doctor. So I was like, Mom, I'm a pediatrician. This is what we're doing.
And I can totally see in that scenario how I would have parents of my patients who would try to say that to their grandparent or their parent, and it would not fly.
Right, it would not fly.
Yes.
This is why all adults need to be on board. So it got to a point where we were beginning to let our oldest cry it out. And there's a wrench in this story that made it extra challenging. Because he would get himself worked up so much, he would actually vomit.
Yes, I talk to parents about this as
Right.
well.
Right. He would throw up because he was crying and upset. And of course, if your baby just threw up, everyone rushes in. There goes the Ferber. Everyone rushes in.
Right.
We change the sheets. We bathe the child again. We do the whole routine over again. And as I described earlier, he was a lower percentile in his weight. And any calories that he lost that way, could we allow that? And then eventually, trying to let him cry it out, he realized, like smart children do, that if he throws up, then we come in.
Yes, yes.
And we almost trained him,
Yep.
inadvertently trained him. He knew what he had to do to get us in there.
When I have parents in that situation, I do counsel them. Okay, there is some encouragement in this. This is a very logical, smart response. This child is like correctly processing their motivation and logically how to
Sure.
get what they want. There's value in that.
I mean, and then this is the trouble in doing it with a 15, 18-month-old as opposed to a 9-month-old who
Yeah.
won't make those connections. So I fully acknowledge that I was late in the game here, and maybe that contributed to our difficulty. So my husband and I made the decision, very difficult decision as parents, that he is safe. We can hear him on the monitor, that we are going to really up our game here, let him cry. He's going to throw up, and we're not going to go in, and we're going to prevent my mother from going in. And that is how we have to sleep train this child. Okay, so it took less than a week, right?
Yes, that's the thing. You just have to grit through it. But 95% of the time, I'm not going to say 100% ever with anything with parenting, but the far majority of the time, it's fast. That's the hope.
It was exceedingly difficult, that first one. And honestly, I have to say the concluding statement to this story is months later, after he was sleeping through the night and doing much better, my mother actually came to me and said, I had my doubts about your methods, but it was the right thing to do.
That's awesome.
Yes, so I mean, when does your mother ever say that? And if you knew my mother, this is huge for her to have said this to me. I mean, it's one of a pivotal moment in my parenting to get
Yes.
my mother's approval that way.
Yes. So I'm excited now to transition. I want to hear the guidance that you give your patients when they come to you in the office with this question. And then maybe we can give some summary points for our listeners. So I'm sure you have a talk that you give parents if you find that they're really desperate to sleep through the night. They're maybe like me, where they really depend on their own sleep. What do
Sure.
you say?
Sure. So this is a very common topic. I think I talk about it almost every time I'm
Hmm.
working. So first of all, I kind of set the stage. You ask questions about what the sleep patterns are right now, and then, like you mentioned, looking at the growth and development of the child. And if all those metrics seem stable and progressing well, then I reassure them that even if their child is waking up multiple times a night after reviewing their sleep history, your child is getting enough sleep. Right?
Yes, that's
Like
true.
for their health and well-being, waking up once or twice a night, that does not adversely affect their health.
Right.
And then I go on to say, but it probably adversely affects your sleep and your health,
Yes.
referring to the parents. And
Yes.
they will often, chuckle or, laugh and say, yes, of course, our sleep is completely disrupted. We're the ones not getting enough. So I usually propose a couple of things. First of all, I describe to the parents that the goal is to try to have your child get from the awake to the asleep by themselves. And I mentioned this in our previous episode
Mhm.
when you were talking about how you would put your child down awake after feeding and then she would fall asleep by herself. So, this nuance where a lot of parents will feed their baby at night, hold them in their arms, rock them until they are asleep, gently place them in the crib, and tiptoe away. And the theory is that when the child wakes up in the middle of the night or, 10 minutes later, they can't achieve that asleep without that routine. You've set a routine that they need to have to fall asleep. So the first step in this gentle transition is I encourage them to try to put their kids down slightly awake. They're not dead
Yes.
asleep, just looking around a little groggy, and they achieve the asleep without having your warmth and your arms and you there. So, parents that are not willing to do the whole cry it out just yet,
Mhm.
I encourage them to start with this. See if you can do it. They've never tried it before. So, that's usually the first step. Then I, like you, offer the advice of crying it out. And when I advise them to do this, I always tell them that it is done with falling asleep at night. You don't implement the cry it out at nap time because if
Mhm.
they've cried for half an hour and the nap's maybe over, do you get them then? But when you start at the beginning of the night and they're crying, they have to sleep. You're not going to get them until they've slept. I also tell them that all adults in the household need to be on board with this plan.
Mhm.
And if that's not the case, then it will most likely be unsuccessful because someone will cave, go in and get the baby and reverse the whole plan. And when I say that, oftentimes the parents look at each other, or if it's one parent there, they will make some comment on, oh, we can do that, or we can't do that right now. After all adults are on board, I recommend something similar to you. I do suggest, if they would like to, do that transitional Ferber
Mhm.
time interval, go in, don't pick your baby up, but reassure, then leave again. But sometimes it's hard for parents to hear their baby cry, and going in helps, like give them something to do. But I often personally recommend cold turkey.
I do
Like,
love cold. I tell them cold turkey is going to be the fastest.
and I tell them that too. Yeah, that if all their needs are met, they've been changed, they've been fed, they've
Yes.
been read to, they're safe in their crib, it's warm enough or not too cold, whatever. You reassure yourself as a parent that all their needs are met. You put them down and say good night, and then you walk out. And they have to sleep. It's, 10 hours until the next day. So let that happen. And then after they achieve that, the awake to the sleep by themselves, then the theory is if they wake up or stir any time in the middle of the night, they can get themselves back to sleep again.
I'm just going to summarize a few points from this. First of all, you and I both alluded to this is personal preference. It doesn't affect your child's long term outcome if they're sleeping through the night at 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, or age 2. This really comes down to what works best for the parent and baby together.
Mhm.
Secondly, I do remind parents that the best thing they can do for their baby at this age is to do what's best for the parent. If you're a better parent when you're sleeping through the night, then let's encourage your baby to do that so you can be the best parent for them possible. And then thirdly, it is okay to let your baby cry. In fact, I
Yeah.
found this really funny quote from a obstetrics handbook from 1890 that said, "Do not spoil the baby by picking him up every time he cries. A certain amount of crying is not harmful. It even gives him some exercise," which we really laugh at now. But if you know that your baby is safe in their crib, there's no stuffed animals, nothing that they can get wrapped up in, it is okay. And I actually use that advice if I see a baby that is very colicky. I had one that was very colicky, as you know. I will tell them preventatively. There are times where you're going to be so tired and your baby is just continuing to cry, and you need to know that you can go lay them down in their crib and let them cry and walk away, or
Yeah.
go to a different room and close the door
Yeah.
and lay down. Do what you need to do, because there are sometimes with colicky infants that whatever you do doesn't soothe them, and it is okay to let them cry. At any rate, all to say, I do reassure them that it is safe and it is okay to let your baby cry.
This has been a great discussion on getting babies to sleep through the night, and knowing that even if parents can't achieve this sleeping through the night, their baby is still healthy and most likely getting enough sleep.
Yes, that's so important. And I'll say we've recorded 2 sessions now on infants and sleep. At some point, we need to do an episode on sleep regression. The baby's sick and the baby's going through a growth spurt, or there's this terminology of a developmental leap. all these
Yeah.
things that interfere with sleep.
And also travel, teething. There's
Oh,
so
sure.
many
So
things
many
that
things.
create a bump in the sleep pattern.
On deck, at some point, we will do an episode on sleep regressions and typical sleep regressions in infants. But I've really enjoyed this discussion. You've really got me thinking, and I hope it's been of benefit to our listeners.
Me too. So this is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Sylvia.
And I'm Vivian. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.